Hello, and thank you for joining Viz ICH's sponsored webinar on intracerebral hemorrhage. My name is Susanna Deutsch, representing Viz, and I will be your moderator today. Before we get started, a few housekeeping rules for today. We will have an opportunity for questions at the end of Dr. Mocco's talk. Please use the Q&A button to submit your questions. The recorded webinar will also be available to all registrants following in the follow-up email. This email will also include a demo link for our new algorithm, Viz ICH+. So we're going to start sharing now. Okay, so Viz ICH+ is our latest algorithm in our Viz hemorrhage suite, which includes ICH, SDH detection, and now measurements of acute ICH. And we have in this slide, you can see that the algorithm will send a notification telling you when a report has been completed. And in the middle screen, you can see what's very unique about this measurement algorithm is that you will see color-coded segmented overlay outlining all the hyperdensities and providing measurements for each of these color-coded hyperdensities right on the screen. It also provides midline shift measurement and measurement of the volume of the lateral ventricles. On the third screen here on the right, you will see that you can opt to look at this data in a report format where you can see multiple hyperdensities are identified. And if you check or uncheck the hyperdensities of interest, it will calculate automatically the total volume for those hyperdensities. So that gives you the ability to select what's of interest and have all the relevant measurements automatically on your mobile and desktop versions. Okay. So with that said, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Mocco, who serves as the Vice Chair of Neurosurgery and Director of the Cerebrovascular Center at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. He is also a professor of neurosurgery at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. With his extensive background in medical technology, Dr. Mocco has pioneered advancements in neurovascular care, particularly in stroke and aneurysm treatment, and most recently, brain-computer interfaces. His leadership bridges cutting-edge research and clinical practice, making minimally invasive procedures more accessible and effective. Dr. Mocco's work at Mount Sinai demonstrates his dedication to advancing care for ICH patients, positioning Mount Sinai as a center of excellence. Through pioneering workflows and treatments, he strives to improve outcomes for neurosurgical patients facing this challenging condition. Dr. Mocco, thank you for joining us today, and we're looking forward to hearing a little bit more about time is brain for ICH.
Thank you, Susanna, very much. And if you could send me a recording of that to send to my mom, she would really love it. So I appreciate that. I'm here today to talk to you about sort of what I think is, I haven't been an early AI adapter. I thought I don't really use ChatGPT or other things. But I realize that AI's already transformed my life in regards to how I deal with acute and urgent care. And in particular, I think the use of AI and Viz AI is incredibly important and valuable in intracerebral hemorrhage care. And so I'd love to talk about that. And for those of you that are old enough to remember the old Reese's commercials, they're two great tastes that taste great together. Briefly, here are my disclosures. Really the only major relevant one is that I am a consultant for Viz AI, and so that is there. Viz AI has come out with Viz ICH Plus, and essentially just to think about it simply, for any of you that use Viz already for thrombectomy, for large vessel occlusion detection, it's similar, right? Patient gets scanned, it immediately gets sent to Viz. Viz applies its AI algorithms, and then that sends messages to all of the caregivers. What I love about Viz is that it's empowering the critical information to go directly to the care providers, and not necessarily running through other routes of interpretation or determination. I don't think it replaces those other routes, but rather it provides an express route directly to the care provider who can then follow up on all of those things. And it does it in an incredibly seamless and software focused fashion. It doesn't feel like it's some wonky engineering tool, but rather that it's a seamless software app on my phone that works just as easily as any other. Actually, it works much better than the way most apps work. But even normal shopping apps and other types of things like that, weather apps and the rest. It's very seamless. Um, we have experience with Viz ICH and the prelim to the ICH Plus, which was a pre-approval research version, where we evaluated over 3,000 stroke codes to detect 235 bleeds with a prevalence rate. Now, this isn't with their stroke codes, right? That doesn't mean they were actually all strokes, right? As many of you who cover busy emergency rooms, actual strokes with true neurologic deficits are often a limited number of the stroke codes that you actually get called. But what we found was a accuracy level approaching 99%, and this is published, and you can go look at it and see that data behind. So you say, okay, great. So AI, that's neat. It's neat that you have this fancy little software interplay on your phone. Excuse me. But who cares? Why? What does it matter? Why do we need urgent detection? Why do we need AI for ICH? Many of you might be wondering, who cares? I understand why we need it for LVO, but why do we need to know any quicker if a patient has an ICH? And that's what I'd like to talk to you about. And I'll start with a simple fact that, and I'm going to prove it, I believe, over the next few slides. But in ICH, time absolutely 100% matters. Now, part of that is self-evident. If time matters for ischemic lesions of the heart, if time matters for ischemic lesions of the brain, why wouldn't time also matter for a mass effect lesion in the brain? Right? It makes sense. And in fact, there's a lot of experimental data that confirms this. So this is just a partial list. You can go look them up: brain research, neurologic research, the journal Stroke, all kinds of papers, Journal of Neurosurgery, that show that time matters in ICH models in animal data. Now, I understand you might roll your eyes a little bit at the animal data, but fundamentally, this proves mechanistically that this makes sense, a lot of sense. But I'm here to tell you that there's actually very, very supportive clinical data as well. So there was a large meta-analysis that looked at over 2,000 cases published across a number of trials over about 25 years. What they found that for patients that were consented within 8 hours, so this isn't actual surgery within 8 hours, it's consenting within 8 hours, those patients had dramatically improved outcomes relative to the rest of them. They didn't have the patient level data for the actual time of surgery. Now, also, our group here at Mount Sinai published a paper where we looked at patients that underwent endoscopic evacuation of ICH. This is all, non-lesional intracerebral hemorrhage. And we found that for patients, even when we were operating out 72 hours, we don't do that anymore, but we looked at the effective time, and there was a dramatic improvement with earlier surgery. And in fact, every hour delay was associated with a 5% reduction in the likelihood of the patient achieving a good outcome. Now, you don't have to take my word for it or US data word for it. There's a group in the Netherlands, the Dutch ICH Surgery Trial Study Group, and they did a study level meta-analysis, which they published, and you can go look, the references there. And what they found is that all of the signal for positivity in studies were in early trials that were performed in the early window rather than in delayed windows. Now, even the American Heart Association, Stroke Association, and their current guidelines call out the question of time and its likely importance, highlighting two trials that showed benefit, randomized prospective trials that showed suggestions of benefit for early surgery, and that there's a real need for us to figure out what window would be best. And I want to highlight one of those trials. This is a prospective randomized trial It does not get enough attention, in my opinion. It was in reasonably modern times, published in 2006. And in that trial, they randomized patients to ICH removal within less than 8 hours. They had 108 patients in that trial. And by the way, this population was a very large amount of basal ganglia hemorrhages, side note. Um, and what they found was a dramatic improvement with surgery, with 3 times the number of patients achieving a good outcome and no signal for mortality. Now, they did have a higher bleed rate when they operated in less than 5 hours. So we definitely have to maximize our surgical ability to limit the bleeding. Now, all of this changed with Enrich. I'm guessing many of you are familiar with this trial, but basically, this was a prospective randomized trial for evacuation of non-thalamic ICHs, looking at lobar hemorrhages and basal ganglia hemorrhages using the brain path system with the Myriad. They had 300 patients enrolled, and here are the results that they presented. It's subsequently been published in the New England Journal of Medicine. I encourage you to go look at the data. And overall, for all patients randomized in the trial, they showed a 98% posterior probability of superiority for surgery compared to leaving it alone. Now, it's important, Enrich required surgery within 24 hours. So Enrich is showing you that surgery is beneficial if it's done within 24 hours. Now, what's even more amazing is if you look at the lobar group alone, and this is the group that drove the benefit, and excuse me, in this trial, in this group, it was a 99.7 posterior probability of benefit for surgery within 24 hours in the lobar hemorrhage population. And in fact, here's their Grata bars showing a dramatic shift towards benefit in the 147 evacuated patients. Now, Enrich, although they required surgery within 24 hours, they didn't mandate that it happen right away. And in fact, the mean time to surgery was 16 and a half, sorry, median time to surgery was 16.6 hours. Actually, the mean time was 16.7. So it's basically the same thing. But what's interesting, although they didn't require you to go to surgery right away, they still got to the OR pretty quickly. And so for those that think, oh, well, you can't really mobilize for an ICH quickly, in truth, they took patients from randomization, the decision to go to surgery, to the time they did surgery in under an hour and a half. So this is doable and achievable. Adam Arthur did the commentary at the AANS presentation, did a great job, and he did a number needed to treat analysis for doing ICH evacuation for the whole cohort, and in particular for the low bars. And what he found was a number needed to treat of about 11 and a half. And you can see that this is comparable to the number needed to treat to give benefit for clipping a ruptured aneurysm in this slide. It's quite powerful. Now, this is despite surgery still going to an hour and a half. Now, let's talk about surgery taking an hour and a half to do it. Now, there's another trial some of you may heard of. It hasn't been published, but it was recently presented. Again, actually, I think Adam Arthur made that presentation. And this was an endoscopic evacuation trial that was treatment within 72 hours, not within 24 hours. It also initially included thalamic hemorrhages. There was a target enrollment of 500 patients for that trial. However, they enrolled less than half of the patients. When Enrich came out, they DSMB did a interim analysis of some sort, and they therefore halted. It's important to note they did not meet pre-specified futility or success criteria. And in fact, this was instead a sort of a sponsor chosen closed trial due to the external data. This data was recently presented. They also found a signal for time suggesting earlier surgery was beneficial. Now, you might have seen this paper that said, well, but they did an analysis of the MISTI 3 and the Stitch trials, and those studies showed no benefit, no effect of time. Well, that's true, but consider the fact that the median time until randomization, not even surgery, in MISTI 3 was 47 hours. In Stitch 2, the mean time to surgery was over 24 hours, it was 27 hours, right? And the combined analysis in that paper, when they talked about the mean time to surgery for the MISTI cohort and the Stitch cohort, it was 63 hours and 31 hours respectively. So clearly these were patients getting intervened on where time was not the critical concern and it was not within 24 hours. If you take into account our data that shows a dramatic effect of time, when you take into account the DIS data that shows dramatic effect for time, and I don't have a slide in here right now, but also Gustavo Padilla presented a sub-analysis or a subsequent analysis of the enriched data, and he showed that there was a signal for surgery of less than 13 hours or 12.7 or something like that, 12.3, something like that, for further benefit for surgery. All of the data suggests that time matters. And if time matters, AI becomes absolutely crucial. And in fact, I want to sort of lay it out very simple. If you look at every prospective randomized trial that has been put out there, published or presented in a major stage that I'm aware of for surgery for ICH, I want to highlight something. There are 4 that required surgery within 24 hours. And there were 4 that allowed surgery and evaluated people with surgery after 24 hours. The 4 within 24 hours have much less N, and yet all of them show signal of benefit, with significant benefit in Pentansis and Enrich, and strong signals of benefit for Morgenstern and Zuccarella, despite having less than 40 patients in both of those studies. In contrast, despite thousands of patients in trials evaluating after 24 hours, none of those trials show benefit for evacuation. It is clear that time absolutely matters. This is seen over and over again in the data and in the figures. In fact, we published a meta-analysis of those 4 positive trials, and we showed if you pull all that data together, there's an odds ratio of about 2-fold better chance of achieving independence if you do surgery early, according to these trials. Now, I'm going to give you a couple quick examples and then wrap up for some questions. I just want to show you a case or two to give you an idea of how profound this can be. We had this 47-year-old gentleman come in. He's healthy, very fit guy, bodybuilder, and I stroke scale 6, not too bad, focal weakness, not surprising when you see this hemorrhage, right? And this is a hemorrhage you could leave alone and you'd watch him for a few days. He might get a little worse with edema, but eventually he's probably going to make a good recovery with rehab and other things, right? I mean, it's unlikely unless it expands to be devastating.
Your left leg.
This is a video before, and I'm not going to let it play the whole time, but you can see he can't move his leg at all. We're trying, we ask him to, he can't move it at all, and he can very weakly move his arm. So this is after we do the evacuation. You can see we were able to get a complete evacuation, pre and post. This is for the intraprocedural CT scan that we did, and this is the regular high quality CT scan that we did. Pre and post here, pre and post here. And so you say, okay, but what does it matter? This is immediately after surgery.
See if you can lift your
So
foot off.
immediately after surgery, he's now showing movement of his leg, and not just movement, but strong anti-gravity movement. And in fact, 15 hours later, the next morning, he's already ambulating with light assist for balance. He ended up making a fantastic complete recovery. This is his MRI and follow-up, and he returned to MRS of 0. And whether it was right or not, we let him go back to going to the gym. But he did have hypertension, which we got under control. Give you one more example. 55-year-old guy. He has this hemorrhage. This is too small of a hemorrhage. We wouldn't want to intervene on this hemorrhage. But on his CTA, he had a spot sign. So he's at an outside hospital. We said, transfer, come into us. Let's watch you in case you get worse. Sure enough, by the time he gets us, this hemorrhage has blossomed dramatically. You can see it is a basal ganglia hemorrhage, and it's quite significant. His NIH stroke scale is a 15. He has a profound deficit at this time. This is his post scan after we evacuated it. He has dramatic improvement. In fact, he's able to go home post-op day 4. A patient with this hemorrhage would not traditionally go home, probably at our center, for at least 10 days. There'd be a lot of edema. He's completely plegic on one side. He'd probably have to go to rehab, all these other things. Instead, we happen to be running a course on how to do ICH surgery. And this is actually that patient 4 days after his surgery. You can see his IV still in, but they've dressed him in civvies because he's getting picked up in an hour or two by his family, and he's completely neurologically intact. So I'm going to leave you with one more question. You say, okay, that's great. You help people. The studies appear to show it's good if you do it less than 24 hours. But aside from that, what are the motivators? Why should I want to do this? And I'm going to give you a couple things, right? So the first one is we just showed. It's clearly better for patients. I would tell you that I think the evidence is quite overwhelming. I'll also tell you something else, and I hope we have ICU docs on the call that want to comment. But my experience is your ICU docs will love you. I've had plenty of times where one of our ICU docs have said, "Hey, would you just take this patient for evacuation if it's a borderline case?" Because once we do it, the next day, morning, the CT scan looks clean. They're ready to move on. They're ready to go to the floor, go to rehab, get a trach or a peg. But you're not going through that like multi-day process of watching the swelling and the edema, and then they start getting worse on day 3 because of the swelling. All of that gets resolved. Because of that, it decreases your hospital length of stay, and there's economic data showing that by doing the surgery, you reduce the overall cost of the case. And therefore, this has a positive impact on the hospital for revenue. And tied to that, it's worth noting, this isn't like in the early days of thrombectomy where there was no revenue for doing it. These are already established valid CPT codes that you can do. So you're helping people, and you're able to do that in a meaningful way that still supports your effort and time. And so with that, I'll say thank you. I'm excited to, listen to questions and talk about it. I think once you see Viz, once you hold it, early on when I first heard about Viz, I thought, okay, great, this is one more big AI kind of thing. Let's do AI. When I finally saw the demo and used the commercial product on my phone, by the way, I used the commercial product and was using it clinically before I ever got involved with them as a consultant. Because when I started using it in a clinical manner, I was just amazed at the interface. It's very intuitive, it's very smooth and very easy. You zoom in with your fingers, you window it with your fingers, you swipe, you communicate. And in fact, we've moved our entire stroke communication platform through Viz now. So we used to use WhatsApp chats and texts and things. All of that goes through. There's a chat function. All of that goes through Viz. It's become extremely critical and foundational in our program. And that move, by the way, was not pushed by me. That was something that our director of stroke neurology really wanted. It also provides us a HIPAA secure platform that's much more facile than the one that was provided through our EMR. I don't know, Susanna, do you have can you show them the interface at all? Do you have like a video or something you might be able to show, or I don't know if you can screencast or something like that?
Yes, I believe I have something that I could share. Yeah, if you just give me a second here, I'll pop it up. Okay, can y'all see that? I'm assuming yes.
I don't, but that might be on my end. No, I don't see it. Anyone else see it?
We can see it, Susanna.
Oh,
Thank you.
great.
Okay, so this is what the notification looks like. You'll have a report completed notification pop up. And you just click on that, you get into the patient card. You'll see 2 screens on the patient card in that previous, and you can pick on a regular non-contrast CT or this non-contrast CT with the segmented overlays. And so you could see it makes it real easy to visualize where the hyperdensities are, and obviously the midline shift and the ventricles. And right there, as I mentioned earlier, you get these numbers automatically, almost immediately after the scan. In this part, I'm just showing the calculator where you can automatically select the hyperdensities of interest, and it automatically calculates the total volume if that's a requirement or a necessary piece of information. It has all the regular functions of Viz, like the chat. This is HIPAA compliant, secure chat. It also has an opportunity for you to activate the response team. So if you have an activation, obviously for your acute ischemic stroke program, or perhaps even if you're Mount Sinai, your ICH program, you can activate, and you can see there on the patient log all the activity, including the transfer. So that's pretty much what I have to share. Okay. So thank you so much, Dr. Mocco, for your presentation. I think that the work that the Mount Sinai has done is really groundbreaking, and really showing where ICH can go. These patients that really don't usually do so well. So it's really great to see those 2 case examples, and thank you for showing that. I'm gonna go ahead and switch now to our Q&A portion of our webinar. Okay, and this is one for you, Dr. Mocco.
Sure.
Do you envision systems of care updating to transfer ICH cases similar to LVO cases?
Absolutely, without question. This is something we already do. We have 8 different hospitals that will routinely send us ICH cases. And in fact, this is another place where Viz becomes absolutely crucial because we have relationships with centers where they have Viz and we have Viz. And so some of them push automatically to our phone, depending on the relationship. And some of them we can access their Viz and look at it, or they can share through Viz the images with us. And so this is crucial. I think that it's hard for every neurosurgical group everywhere to offer the kind of 24/7 investment it takes to take care of these. Certainly it's doable. But there's going to be plenty of centers where, just like there are centers that can't perform thrombectomy, there's going to be centers that don't have either people with cranial privileges or people that are comfortable doing these things, or the ability to manage the patients after the fact with the neuro ICU. And so in that case, I do think a transfer paradigm is going to take off. And I look forward to that. And I think Viz is, at least for us, instrumental in that process.
So along the same lines, somebody else asked, what is the biggest hurdle to early evacuation or pushback?
I mean, really, it's the end of it's the surgeons, and if they believe the data and they feel convicted that this is something important and should be done. Most places where there's neurosurgery have the capability for 24/7 surgery. Most of the time, if a surgeon says this is a good idea, we should do it, it's doable. I will say, I go around the country giving grand rounds and academic talks on this topic. There are certainly even friends of mine that are stroke neurologists that have been less convicted by the data. However, when we go through it in detail, I find that most people kind of recognize that it's there. So I think really the issue at hand is the community being passionate about it and believing about it and wanting to do it. I think the resources, unlike thrombectomy, I think the resources for ICH evacuation are relatively prevalent, and it's certainly doable once people make that decision.
Okay, thank you. Another question on, does the size of the bleed of the ICH matter? Small versus larger, and have you done evacuations on smaller sized ICH with the same outcomes versus larger sized ICHs?
It's a great question, and the answer is yes. So Enrich used a ICH bottom threshold of 30 milliliters, 30 cc's. And that has been used in a lot of other trials too. Likewise, some trials go down to 20. So there was the MIND trial I talked to you about, went down to 20. Also, there's an Invest single arm IDE that we were involved with that went down to 20. The 20 so there's different choices. People often gravitate to 30 because of its relevance in some ICH scores. But there's a paper by Joe Broderick in the Cincinnati group looking at the natural history of ICH, and it shows that patients with 20 cc's, they looked at 20 to 40 cc's, there was still a high degree of disability afterwards. And so therefore we've used our paradigm is to treat at 20 cc's or larger, like I said, along with some other trials. So that does matter in terms of that decision making. There is a question about how big can you go and does it become futile? And there's some data that doing surgery for, bleeds that are 100 cc's plus, are you really, is there just too much damage too quickly? And that's a legitimate question that we're going to look at, post hoc analyses of Enrich and other trials to find out about. I can tell you I have plenty of cases that have been 70, 80 cc hemorrhages that have had spectacular, miraculous results and wonderful recoveries if you get them quickly. I think time becomes increasingly important the bigger the hemorrhage. So yes, the size of the bleed matters. Our clinical practice is 20 cc's or larger. Some people limit it to 30. but those are all things to consider in terms of you evaluate it. I think it's very helpful that you can get these automatic measurements from Viz. Even if you want to go back and do your own evaluations or measurements, it's really spectacular to sort of get that up front. So I think that's a win.
Thank you, Dr. Mocco. We do have a few more questions, but we are at time, so I'm just going to do one more question, and then we'll call it. There was a question about curious if the move for Mount Sinai to centralize all stroke team communication into Viz has helped with data submission for like Get With The Guidelines.
Well, it's, I don't know about specifically Get With The Guidelines, but absolutely, the ability to have everything coming through Viz allows us to screen through that. And we've also used Viz to increase our research enrollments. So by using Viz to screen for ICHs, we're able to identify them more quickly. So for instance, for the fastest trial, which we're part of, which is a trial out of StrokeNet, or for a number of our LVO trials, we find the use of Viz helps us be better at enrolling time-dependent trials. That we've seen for sure. Likewise, we can use it to look over, okay, with the team, what was the last day's cases? Did we miss any cases? What are we looking for? That kind of thing. So that it is a data repository that's very helpful for clinical and quality purposes to be able to have access to that and look back at it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Mocco, and thank you for joining our Viz Express webinar. Like I mentioned earlier, you will get an email with this recording and an interactive demo. I apologize for those who we couldn't get to your questions, but thank you so much for attending.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.